I think it's only European. In my case, certainly not, because I'm an anthropologist and I focus on everything outside of Europe, with the exception of Ireland. I focus on Latin America, Ireland, the Middle East, and West Africa. So my focus is definitely not traditional European, because even Irish is not traditional European. And we also do Scandinavia, England, France, we do Eastern Europe, we do Asia. We look at the globe in this period that goes from 500 AD to roughly 1789, which is the cutoff period. That's the French Revolution, and that's something that would have a huge effect in both the Old World and the New World, including on the later slave revolt in Haiti. And that's really the point at which you can draw a line between the early modern period, which is what some scholars call the Renaissance, from the late 15th through the late 18th century, and the beginning of what you would call modern times. So our center deals with a great deal of history and with a lot of global history. What we're going to do tonight, some of you already know me from many other lectures, both here at the Gilbert Library or at other venues, like the Irish Cultural Center or Poison Pen bookstore, is to continue on this wonderful odyssey we've been taking with Gilbert Library, and I very much thank everyone here at Gilbert, in terms of world mythology. What we have done in this series so far, because this is actually the next to last segment in the series, our last segment will be next month when we deal with West African mythology. What we've done is kind of trace a world arc, beginning with Celtic and Norse mythology, Southwest Native American mythology, the mythology of the Pacific Islands. Now we're going to jump to Mayan and Incan mythology, and then close off with West African mythology. When I use the word myth, I'm not using a derisive, in any way, shape, or form word. Myth is simply a story. And what are our religions for other people are myths. So what we're going to do today is take a particularly interesting look at two of the greatest cultures of Latin America, both of which began in the time period we would call the Middle Ages. Actually, the Mayan Indians began long before then. The Incas began in the period of what we would call the 12th century. So you see, when we talk about the Middle Ages as well, it's not only Europe, it includes Europe, it also includes Latin America. There were many, many civilizations, and the Incas were one of the last of the civilizations of Peru. The Mayan Indians, on the other hand, have been around possibly before Judeo-Christian civilization gets going, because we know from archaeological evidence that the Mayans already began to construct what we would call a recognizably Mayan civilization more than 3,500 years ago. Both the Incas and the Mayas were conquered by Spain in the 16th century, but their history is not the same, because the Incas, although they had a very sustained revolution against the Spanish conquistadors for about 30 years, eventually do submit. The Maya never submit. And the other people of the Andes Mountains also never submit. The Incas were an empire, the Maya were not. And so please get out of your head any nonsense you've ever heard about the Mayan Empire, because there never was a Mayan Empire. There were always a minimum of 17 conflicting city-states. The Mayans fought each other. If you go and visit Central America now, you will find the Mayans. They have not disappeared. They never disappeared. At one point in their history, they simply abandoned their ceremonial areas, left their large cities, and adopted a different type of social organization. The Inca were an empire. And as any empire would, and as Spain would do to them, they conquered other independent cultures, and they subjected them. to central rule, which in the case of the Incas was Cusco. When the Incas were conquered by the Spanish, Inca civilization collapsed, but the culture did not die. So we can't talk about people who disappeared because the people are still here. When you visit South America, after you visited Central America, and you go down to the country that I'm originally from, which is Argentina, Northwest Argentina, Peru, Ecuador, most of Bolivia, part of southern Colombia, and part of northern Chile, all this was part of the Inca Empire. There's no more Inca Empire, but you certainly have all the descendants of the Inca, and they are the Quechua-speaking Indians. Nobody has disappeared. There's a type of mythologizing of the people that's often done on bad television shows and all over the internet. And just one more thing I'm going to say before we actually start, because this is all simply introduction. I'm sure you remember back to 2012, when there was so much nonsense running around about the Maya, that it, I think, surpassed any form of internet hysteria I had seen till that point. The Maya themselves laughed at that, because the Maya knew exactly where that nonsense had begun. And so please forget all of these pseudo-documentaries about Mayan prophecies. The Mayans, today and then, have never believed in prophecies. The Mayan conception of time is cyclical. So worlds never end. When one cycle ends, another one simply begins. But one day in the 1990s, a very great professor of Mayan epigraphy, that means deciphering the inscriptions in Mayan hieroglyphs, said as a joke, his name was Michael Coe, he said as a joke, looking at one particular inscription, knowing very well that the rest of the inscription talked about a cycle renewing itself, he said, wouldn't it be funny if we put this out there, that the world was going to end when one of the Mayan cycles ended? His name is Michael Coe. He's still, to this day, a very, very great professor of Mayan epigraphy and anthropology at Yale. And some of his students, both non-Mayan and Mayan, ran with the idea. And this nonsense started circulating around internet, really before internet was as massive as it is now. So go back to about 1998, when, okay, who was online in 1998? Some people, right? Not most. At that point, this rumor began to take off. It is rubbish. It never had anything to do with the Mayans themselves. But the Mayans were very funny. When tourists started coming down to Central America, all of these kind of wide-eyed, starstruck Western tourists asking them if the world would end, the Mayans understood one thing very quickly. The world wasn't ending, but this was a magnificent opportunity to make some money. And since we know that the West had conquered the Mayans and taken much of their wealth from them, why don't you view this as a type of karma? Okay, now, the funny thing is, and I'm telling this to you because as an anthropologist, as somebody who worked for 23 years with very living Maya and Quechua Indian communities throughout Latin America, these people are, you know, quite human, as you and I are. They are not this mystical type of invention that I think a lot of times Western culture would like them to be. They are neither more transcendent than you and I are, or any different in any way. And when the native peoples in South America saw how well the Mayan Indians were cashing in on this in Central America, some very intelligent Quechua Indians from Peru sat down with the Peruvian Ministry of Tourism and said, well, why don't we invent a prophecy for 2121? You know, that will come up soon and we can start siphoning some cash off of that. And why am I telling you this? Because as native people throughout the Americas will tell you, and as I learned, there are two very dangerous ways in which Native Americans are stereotyped. And I hope to break some of that with you tonight, and to take you really to the beauty of their culture. One of the stereotypes is the negative one, and you know that one. That's the image of the quote-unquote wild Indian that you can see in many extremely racist older movies from Hollywood. Sometimes it still creeps into modern ones. That's one. You know that is a hate-filled image and you can attack that openly. But as a very, very wise Mayan shaman in the city of Campeche said to me, he said, you know, idealizing us is almost as dangerous as demonizing us. Because when you idealize us, you're going to have expectations of us that no human being can ever meet. We are not more noble than you are. We are every bit as annoying as you are. And so you're going to see that the Mayans and the Incans and every other native people, I repeat, all of whom are still very much alive, very much a part of our own culture, also here in Arizona. They have exactly the same flaws that we do. The aim is neither to demonize nor to glorify. The aim is to understand. And so when I talk about mythology of Mayan and Incan people, I use the word mythology in the same way I would use it to describe our Bible or the Quran. It is not in any way a negative term. The great French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, whose life masterpiece is a gigantic volume actually divided in two called Mythologies, uses the term correctly. Mythologies are beliefs. They are only false or true depending upon what you attribute to them. So when you talk about ancient Greek mythology, please remember it's ancient Greek religion. When you talk about Egyptian mythology, if you know anything about Egyptian culture, you know that that was a very, very profound religion. So one man's religion is another woman's mythology, all right? The words are interchangeable. All mythology means is stories. I just want you to see a little bit of what we do and to know what's coming up. We have our final section in this series, and we will be continuing on with Gilbert Library with other series. And that's the one that deals with ancient West African legends. I'm going to be drawing connections there between West Africa and Brazil, where so much of the West African population was taken as slaves, and we're going to see how their beliefs survived. Then we have another wonderful program on September 14th, so write that down already, at the Tempe Historical Museum, where we're going to deal with the past of Native Americans, Hispanics, Spaniards, and Anglos, all here in this very multicultural state that often does not like to admit that it's multicultural, but it is. And that's at the Tempe Historical Museum. And then we're going to have another wonderful ad hoc lecture on the campus. You're welcome to come, okay? All of these things are free, so you have no excuse. And that actually deals with Native American games from the Middle Ages and how they reflect society. So we have some very, very interesting things coming up. We hope you will be part of them. And now let's be part of this one. Okay. So if I say the word Inca, and today we're going to look at the Inca and the Maya. Some of you thought the Aztecs. No, my friend, the Aztecs don't come tonight. They're not invited to the party. Tonight is Inca and Maya. And no, the Maya did not have a connection with the Aztecs, and please don't say Aztecs and Mayans just because fools on the Discovery Channel say it. Because if you know anything about the history, you know that the Mayans fought the Aztecs, and they absolutely hated the Aztecs. And when the Aztecs surrendered to Hernan Cortez, the Mayans kept fighting. There is no commonality between their cultures. I don't know why they're always linked together. The only point that brought them together was conquest when the Aztecs attempted to conquer the Mayans. They are not part of the same culture, and their worldview is entirely different. We're beginning actually with the Inca, at least on this slide. And so you see one of the iconic images of Inca culture, which is the fortress of Machu Picchu. Now, here we talk about, you know, mythology and history, and I'm sure you've heard watching these silly late-night documentaries, nobody knows the origin of Machu Picchu. Yes, we all know the origin of Machu Picchu. It's written in about, 2000 colonial chronicles. The Inca king who built it was a very charismatic and very imperialist, every bit as much as Spain later, ruler by the name of Pachacutec, whose name in the Quechua language means world turner. And he was indeed the world turner and shaker. And he was to a certain degree the Julius Caesar of the Incan Empire, and he built what you're looking at, Machu Picchu. What is that? It is not a mystery. It was the summer palace of the Emperor Pachacutec. Okay, and that is in so many Spanish colonial chronicles, and it is in so many history books on the Incas. I think when they talk to you on TV, they're taking you for fools. We don't know the origin. Yes, we do know the origin. In fact, when you do archaeological excavation in Machu Picchu, you find something very interesting. You find food remains from the early part of the 16th century. Why is that? Because when the news finally got up to the mountains in Machu Picchu, because this is 12,000 feet up, that the Incas had been conquered, that the Inca Emperor Atahualpa had been taken prisoner in the city of Cajamarca, many of the people who worked in Machu Picchu were slaves of the Incas. Okay? Another horrible similarity between Native Americans and Europeans. Slavery on both sides of the Atlantic. And so these other people who were not Inca, but who belonged to earlier cultures, conquered by the Inca, it appears what they did literally was throw down their work implements and go home. That was it. The Inca Empire had ended. So, in a way, it's quite eerie, and it's also quite fascinating because you're seeing a little bit of a human reaction. So, we know that the Inca, the people of the sun, are going to be a little bit more similar to Spain with its empire, England with its empire, than they will be to other native peoples. The two imperial cultures of the New World were the Incas and the Aztecs. And they were every bit as hated by the other native peoples as eventually all of the native peoples in the New World and the Irish in the Old World would hate England and Spain. And now you saw something iconic from the Inca architecture. Now let's take a look at Calakmul. This is Mayan. You will often hear on the Discovery Channel, the Mayans when they disappeared. All right, you'll find that really funny in Central America because you're going to be surrounded by 6 million people who haven't disappeared. And there are at least 23 very living dialects of the one larger Mayan language. They haven't gone anywhere. What they did do at one point was to abandon these great ceremonial centers. Now, the classic period of the Maya, take a look. It's long before civilization really gets going in Europe, with the exception, of course, of the Greeks, the Romans, and the ancient Celts. So 100 to 1000 AD. The Mayans create a civilization which was one of the most advanced in the world in terms of astronomy, mathematics, and writing. The Mayans had a very sophisticated system of writing, and 3,000 of their codices were burned by the Bishop Diego de Landa, who thought they were heresy. So you know the way Henry VIII's armies went through England burning Catholic manuscripts, then later Catholic armies go through Central America burning Mayan manuscripts. What is the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that anybody can act like a savage. White or Indian or black or green. Why did they abandon these cities? Apparently at one point, and you're going to see how this connects with the Mayan mythology, the Mayans got very, very tired of their holy men running the show. And if we talk about separation of religion and state, I will tell you that the Mayans actually believed in it long before the idea got to the West. Because what we know is that in the year, between the year 900 and 1000, there are huge uprisings in the Mayan world, and they kill their priests. Now remember, when I say priests, this is long before Christianity. I'm talking about the Mayan religion, which we'll get into in a second. When that uprising uprising is over. The ceremonial centers are abandoned, but the Mayans continue to live and they continue to practice their religion. There is one big difference. The religion now is separate from the life in the village or the state. Okay? So when Pedro de Alvarado, the Spanish conquistador who definitely drew the attention of the native peoples because he was blonde, and the Aztecs had called him Tonatiuh, which was originally the name of the sun god. When he came to the Mayan area, he was expecting the Mayans, the people who had built these great structures, who had been the greatest astronomers, among the greatest astronomers and mathematicians in ancient history. By the way, for those who don't know, the Mayan also were the first people, even before the Hindus, who invented the concept of zero. Okay, a little mathematical fact for you. Alvarado expected the Mayans to bow down and worship him the same way the Aztecs had done with Cortes. But boy, did he get a surprise. You know, this is where mythology or religion, now I'm going to use the two terms in the same way. Again, you decide whether the stories you believe, I decide whether the stories I believe are true or not. There's nothing evil about the word mythology. It's stories, as religion is. And there's nothing bad about that. According to the Aztec stories, they were waiting for the fifth sun, the period when all life on Earth would end cataclysmically. But the Mayans were not waiting for any fifth sun. Mayan calendars are endlessly cyclical. And so Alvarado, who was expecting a nice easy job, because you know the Aztecs had collapsed in 3 years. It's a kind of amazing fact. The most warlike civilization of the New World barely lasted 3 years. And so Cortes, the conqueror of Mexico, told his lieutenant, Alvarado, the Mayans should be easy. I know. And when Cortes himself went to conquer them, that's the beginning of the end of Cortes's political career. Because guess what? The Mayans are not waiting for any cataclysm. They're not waiting for any day of judgment. They're not waiting for anything. Their conception of the calendar and the universe and the gods is endlessly cyclical. And they have 3 calendars which are still very much in use today. One is a long count of 5,120 years. Then that one goes around and is always followed by 2 other calendars. One of 360 days, the solar calendar, plus 5 days of rest, that's your solar year, and another lunar calendar of 260 days. And they go around like interlocking wheels, and they never stop. So they were not waiting for anything to end. And Alvarado would have a very difficult time in Central America, and the Mayans never stopped fighting. And that includes even into the 20th century, when as a result of social inequality, they rise up in 1994 in something called the Zapatista Rebellion. So you can't keep these people down. They call themselves the Irish of the New World. And there are a group of people in Central America who call themselves caracoles, which in Spanish, you know, is a snail. It's a snail in the Mayan area, which is red on the inside and brown on the outside. Why? Because there were many, many Irish slaves who were transported by the British to Central America and sold to the Spanish, and ended up in the Mayan area and intermarried with the Mayan. So you should know that in the town of Copan, in Honduras, and in the villages around Calakmul, in Campeche, a quarter of the population is descended from the Flanagan and O'Rourke families. And the same way the Irish have always been divided, if you know Irish history, into different warring kingdoms. The Mayans were warring city-states, but that's exactly why Alvarado could not conquer them. You understand? Cortez could conquer the Aztecs, Pizarro could conquer the Incas, because when you have one empire, once you kill the emperor, everything is easy. But when you have no empire, when you have a bunch of factious people fighting each other, and then they all turn around and fight you, and you snuff out one city-state, and another one pops up and says, come and fight me, it's endless. In the Mayan belief system, there is an aspect of their beliefs which no Western empire could deal with. The Mayans were not, and they are not, afraid of their gods. In Mayan tradition, you fight your gods. So in the Popol Vuh, one of the great books of Mayan belief, the heroes are those who fight the gods of the underworld. Now, you see, it's going to be very hard to put down a group of people who are not afraid of their own gods. Because if they're not afraid of their own gods, why should they be afraid of you? You can climb up that pyramid, by the way. It's a very, very beautiful site in Campeche, one of the states of Mexico. Two adjacent pyramids, okay? Do you see the two pyramids? That is what Calakmul actually means in the Mayan language. But I just want you to know that was not the original name. The original name is Can, which means the serpent. Archaeologists put that name on. Okay? You have to be a little careful of that sometimes in Central America, but also in the Middle East sometimes. Archaeological sites are given more modern names. The original name is Can because Can in the Mayan language means a serpent. And this is the site of the great serpent dynasty. Now let's talk about the Mayans' beliefs. And then we will get back to the Incans, don't worry. If you ask a Mayan if he is a monotheist, a Mayan will tell you he is, or she is, and they are. Their conception of monotheism might be a little different than yours, or mine, but there's more than one conception of monotheism, and that's something it took the West a long time to learn. For the Mayans, everything is a manifestation of Itzamna. Itzamna is portrayed sometimes, not a lot. The Mayans, interestingly enough, in their sculpture and portraiture, preferred to kind of be a bit political, and they'd give you images of their kings and queens. And when they didn't like the king or the queen, they'd knock off the nose, which is why when you go through the Mayan archaeological sites, many people comment, why is their nose missing? Well, you already know that the Mayans have never had this overwhelming fear of authority, quite the contrary. So if they don't like the ruler, yeah, they knock off the nose. So you don't see that many images of the gods. But here we actually have one, and we know that from the Mayan hieroglyphs, which did not come up in the PowerPoint, but which are underneath these two people sitting here. So you have the divine couple, which, from the Mayan point of view, represents one God, the masculine and feminine aspects of God. Okay? For the Mayas, God is masculine, feminine, and everything in between. Itzamna is represented by the iguana. Okay, has anybody here ever been to Central America, to Yucatan, to Costa Rica, right? Okay? You see iguanas everywhere. And the iguana, that tiny little dinosaur, that little dragon, symbolizes thought and writing. Now remember, the Mayans were, and they are, a very literate people, a people who wrote. And thank heavens they wrote their hieroglyphs on their buildings, because after the conquistadors burned their codices, the only way we have of deciphering their script, and the only way they have, is because thank heavens they also carved it on all of their buildings. Why does an iguana represent writing? Anybody want to guess? Let me see if I can give a chocolate bar to anybody who can guess. Why an iguana? Okay, if you follow an iguana, which might be something you haven't done yet in your life, but if you follow an iguana, it leaves trails. And it leaves very visible trails, and it turns around in all sorts of funny and wonderful ways. And for the Maya, it was writing its pathway in the jungle. And so, for the Maya, the supreme value, think about this, is literacy and mathematics. And so the iguana, which leaves its written trail wherever it goes, represents the supreme value of writing. And so this is the great god. When the Mayans refer to the supreme deity, Itzamna. And the feminine part of the supreme deity, this is a bit like Hinduism if you're familiar with the idea of Shiva and Parvati, the male and the female in one god. Ixchel, the goddess of the moon. For the Maya, God has to be both masculine and feminine, because we are masculine and feminine. And so everything is included in this idea of God. And Ixchel is the goddess of medicine and health. Now this is particularly interesting because many ancient cultures, and the Mayans are an ancient culture that has survived well into the modern period, many ancient cultures proscribed, not prescribed, proscribed, prohibited women from dealing with the medical arts. Au contraire, with the Maya, women were considered the repositories of medical knowledge. And so doctors in the Mayan world were like this doctor, women, okay, overwhelmingly female. And why the moon? Because the Maya observed one thing, which of course anybody will observe observing nature, that the woman's natural menstrual cycle more or less mimics the phases of the moon. So once every 28 or 29 days, the menstrual blood comes. This facilitates procreation and the woman's health. And so Ixchel is a very revered aspect of life for the Maya, and the woman is also associated with, via this, intellectual pursuits. Now, a people's belief, a people's mythology, okay, influences the way they view life, and it influences the way they view politics. And so it is not accidental that the Aztecs, with a very male-dominated mythology, would not associate women with intellectual arts. Well, nor did they do that in Europe, as we know, with the exception of Ireland, where women were. Yeah, that's always the one big exception in Europe. But among the Maya, you have a series of queens, very powerful female, well, obviously they're queens, female queens, but forgive the redundance, who will rule often without husbands, sometimes waiting for their young son or daughter to grow up, or with their husbands, and it is a very egalitarian division of power. One reason I hold out to you that this could happen politically for the Maya is because their belief system facilitated it in terms of their most basic conception of God. Now, you must know who King Pakal was. So the same way you know who Charlemagne is for the French, and who King Arthur is for the British, and originally for the Welsh, the way George Washington is for Americans, or more Abraham Lincoln. Pakal is the great symbol of Mayan power, but Mayans kind of laugh about that because as they point out to you, the joke in Palenque is every Mayan prince considered himself a great ruler, but he had to be very careful at night not to stretch his feet out or it might go into the territory of a rival prince. Because remember, they are not an empire, they were never an empire, they were never united. Even when they fought the Spanish conquistadors, even when they fought the independent Mexican government in the 1840s, when it turns out independent Mexico behaved in every bit as ugly a way to them as imperial Spain, they still weren't united. Okay, they have never been united. And they consider that to be a source of strength in their culture. They say where you have one Mayan, you have three opinions. He's alone, or she's alone. He'll argue with himself, or she'll argue with herself. But Pakal has become the kind of iconic image of the great Mayan prince, and yet we know from all of the hieroglyphs in Palenque that Pakal attributed all of his strength to whom? His mother. Because when Pakal came to the throne, he was 11.5 years old. Okay. Do we have anybody in the audience who was 11 or 12? Thank you. You would already have been king. Cool, right? Majorly cool. Majorly cool. And that was a cool kid. I know, because I know him. Well, Pakal's mother thought that was also cool, but she also thought he needed a little help. At least till age 21 or 22. And so she was the queen regent, and she literally trains him to become this very, very great king. He is considered the greatest king of the Maya, the greatest patron of the arts and mathematics and building and irrigation. He was an extraordinary man, and so now you know behind every extraordinary man is an extraordinary mom. Pakal and his mom, and there you see them. Please take a look at this beautifully carved lintel, which is from the 7th century. Okay, so we're going back 1,400 years ago. And what does that show? Can you see it clearly? You see Pakal sitting on a jaguar throne. Do you all see that? The jaguar in Mayan tradition is the symbol of what they call male protective power. What does that mean? You know that the Mayans believe in shamanism and the ability to change your shape spiritually and or physically. And so the symbol of what they call good male strength, okay, like the male jaguar that protects its family, so think of a very protective father, that should be the symbol of kingship. And so Pakal is sitting on the jaguar. If you look literally, he's sitting on a two-headed jaguar, do you see? Okay, because the jaguar has, of course, both masculine and feminine attributes. And look at mom. See, he's looking at mom, who is handing him the crown. This is very, very important, because in all of Mayan tradition, this idea that masculine strength comes originally from the mother. It creates a different concept of kingship. Because the same way a mother rears her child with love, so the king must protect his kingdom with love. And no king ever forgets the fact that mommy is watching. This is very important because it creates a much more balanced idea, I think you can see, of male-female relations as well. No dark ages. How many of you ever heard that phrase, the dark ages? Ooh, erase that. What certain English and French historians call the Dark Ages was the golden period for the Mayas from the 5th to the 10th century. Golden period for guess what bunch of people in Europe? Who? The Irish. Yes! Yes! That's their golden period. It is a golden period for the Jews of Spain. So before my ancestors got kicked out of there, that was a very wonderful period. So who's it the Dark Ages for? England and France. Did you know the whole world is England and France? Okay, so I just remind you of that because our use of historical terminology is crazy. All right? So this was a very great period for many civilizations, and in the 7th century in Palenque, this was Pakal's greatest period. Now, we saw the beautiful lintel with mom giving him the crown. Now look at the middle picture. And that is actually the death mask. That was the mask that was placed on Pakal's face when he died, after his soul, according to Mayan belief, goes back to the creator, Ixchel, and his feminine aspect, Ixchel. The body remains, and the face is covered with jade. Now, here's something quite fascinating. You know that the Maya did not care about gold. They did not care about gold, they did not care about silver. And you know that when the conquistadors came in the 16th century, the Mayans thought they actually had a sickness which made them which could only be cured by gold. They did not understand this obsession with gold. For the Maya, gold was a metal. What was important for the Maya was this stone, which is jade. And there are very, very great jade deposits in Guatemala, from which apparently all of the Mayas of all of the other surrounding areas drew. Jade for the Mayas represented and represents immortality. And here's something very interesting for the Chinese as well. Now, listen to something interesting. The Mayan word in all of the dialects of the Mayan language, okay, there's one Mayan language and it's divided into many dialects. In all of the Mayan dialects, the word for the north is shaman. Does that sound like something to you? It sounds like the word shaman, right? Shaman means the north. The Maya say that their ancestors came, some from the ocean to the west, that would be the Pacific, and some came after thousands of years from the north. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. Because we know there was a great immigration from Central Asia, through the Bering Strait, down through northern Canada, and down until you get to the foot of Argentina, which is the Patagonia. Why do I tell you this? It's interesting, and also it would explain, as the Maya themselves say, why they share this belief with the Chinese. This was a very, and it is a widespread Central Asian custom to bury the dead with a square and a circle of jade in each of their hands, because that represents the unity of the masculine and feminine principle, and both of those principles being taken back to heaven. So for the Maya, heaven is a huge jade mountain covered by a gigantic chocolate tree, because they were the first people to cultivate chocolate, which is, of course, a New World fruit. So that use of jade and the sacredness of jade meant, of course, that when the conquistadors came in the 16th century, and then when British adventurers came in the 19th, and then when American adventurers came in the early 20th, everybody's looking for gold. The Mayans did not and do not care about gold. The sacred stone is jade. And that is why jade is both the Asian and Mayan immortality motif. And that image that you're looking at here is probably the most famous Mayan artistic image you will see anywhere. That is Pakal. And the joke in Palenque, and throughout all of Yucatan and Campeche, and the rest of the Mayan area, into Belize, is that there's only one sovereign who loved himself more in history than Pakal. And I have a very good friend here who's an Egyptologist, and she knows his name was Ramses, because he was always building statues of himself and images of himself, and so was Pakal. So one thing we can say is he did not suffer from bad self-esteem. He was quite the king. Women, again, we know these strong women in Mayan tradition. We saw that all of Pakal's strength came from a woman, his mother. And now we have another woman who in Mayan tradition is, and I'm not saying this lightly, she is every bit as important in Mayan tradition as the Virgin Mary is in Catholic tradition. Her name is Ixchel. You're looking at an artist's rendering of her. The name means Lady Blood Moon. She is the daughter of one of the gods of the Mayan underworld, and that underworld is called Shibalba. Now, when Spanish missionaries wrongly translated a lot of Mayan stories into Spanish, they translated the word Shibalba using the term el infierno, which would be hell. But that's not quite it. We're going to see in 1 second why the Mayan Shibalba is not the Western idea of hell. and why this woman is such an extraordinary figure. So what are you looking at? This picture is a little confusing if you don't know the story, so because the best part of mythology is telling the stories, let's tell the story. So you notice the two skulls hanging in the tree? First of all, what tree is that? That's the chocolate tree. Do you see the cacao beans? Who of you has ever had the pleasure, I have, of walking through a chocolate forest in Central America? It's the most amazing thing. Okay? There are also chocolate forests in the Amazon. So of course all my Peruvian friends get very angry when I give all the credit for chocolate to the Mayans because they tell me that it started first in the Amazon. It may have started simultaneously in both places, but the Mayans made chocolate one of the most important aspects of their culture, which we know as a symbol of civilization. Isn't it? Chocolate. It was not the drink of the gods. That's an Aztec term. For the Maya, it was a daily drink. It was a gift of the gods for the common people. And it was a symbol of life itself. Because from the chocolate bean, I don't know if you know this, where you get the wonderful drink of chocolate, you can also make soap. You can also weave fabric. So it is literally a symbol of life. And because you can turn chocolate into a powder, it is also a food that will last. So this is the chocolate tree, with two skulls growing in it. Well, this isn't just any chocolate tree. This is the tree at the center of Shibalba, the Mayan underworld. Now, what does Shibalba mean in the Mayan language? It does not mean hell or inferno or anything of that nature. What Shibalba means, listen close because it's quite interesting, is place of your fear. You can get that psychologically. There is no hell worse than the one you imagine for yourself. I don't think anybody can do a worse thing to you than leave you alone in a room with your fears. Take an elevator ride with your fears. It's the worst thing. And so it's a psychological idea. The Mayans laughed when Westerners always, and they continue to laugh, when Westerners ask them, well, is Shibalba a physical place? The Mayans tell you it's any place you are with your unresolved fear. Right? You know the great quote from William Shakespeare, man's mind can make a heaven of hell, or a hell of heaven. That's very much what you do with it. So it's a symbolic idea. And in this place of fear, which represents your fears, Ixchel, the daughter of one of the lords of Shibalba, nasty lord, he's killed two Mayan sacred ball players. You know, the Mayans had created a game which is actually the origin of what you call soccer, and what we in South America call football, right? And the Mayan, excuse me, the lords of Shibalba had challenged these two young players to a game, and they'd beaten them, and they killed them. And they hang their skulls up, but we know that the Mayans did not and do not believe that death is the end. For them, death is just a phase. And so the soul of one of the skulls is still hovering around the skull, and when young Ixchel, the daughter of the Lord, one of the lords of Shibalba, walks by the tree because she likes chocolate, she's going to get some chocolate, the skull talks to her. And the skull asks her to come close, and it's almost as though the skull and Ixchel have a love affair without having a love affair. There's something very ambivalent when you read the Popol Vuh about the dialogue at this point she has with the skull. It is almost as though they are making love without actually touching each other. And at one point, the skull asks her to hold out her left hand. In Mayan tradition, I'm holding out my right, you hold out your left hand to receive energy. And the skull transfers his energy literally into her palm, and she becomes pregnant. And that is the Mayan virgin birth. Because she will later have two great twins, the hero twins. And when she becomes pregnant with the hero twins, she flees Shibalba with the help of some very cool owls. Owls help her. That's interesting, because her father wants to sacrifice her. and the owls help Ixchel flee Shibalba and come up into the middle world. Yes, folks, the Mayans used that phrase, 3,000 years before Jade, what was his name, Tolkien? What was his initials? Yeah, he didn't invent that. The Norse also used it at least 1,000 years before he came up with it. Just remember when you read modern writers, sometimes we say, oh, what original ideas? Usually not. She flees Shibalba and comes into the middle world and gives birth to the hero twins who will later go down to Shibalba. What does that mean in Mayan tradition? It means confronting your fears, right? This time they're not going to be tricked like the other two. They're not going to be lured into it. They walk right into Shibalba. Does this sound like a good therapy session? You walk right up to your fear. This is what they do. You have to read the Popol Vuh. And they say to the lords of Shibalba, here we are. Come on, let's play. And they play with the lords and they defeat the lords. And this very rebellious attitude, later on, as you can imagine, will enable the Maya to begin a rebellion which continued into the late 20th century when the Mayans finally were able to achieve some degree of equality, some degree of it, in Central America. Stick with Mayan women and chocolate. This is what it looked like 1,500 years ago in the 6th century in Calakmul, right? The image of those two beautiful pyramids that you saw in the jungle, when people were making chocolate. And in Mayan tradition, you know the way the British like their tea? The Mayans have chocolate time. And you are considered uncivilized if you do not take an hour and stop what you're doing and have chocolate. And this is also very good for you psychologically, particularly the days when you feel like you're running like a lunatic. You stop, you savor the chocolates, you don't wolf it down, and you give thanks to Ixchel, to the Creator, for giving you chocolate. You have to make it. And women, as we can see in this mural, which comes from the 6th century, so it's now 1,500 years old, were given the task of fabricating chocolate because they were believed to be closer to the Creator than men. Because in Mayan tradition, I want you to take a look at this. This image of a woman, looking at this image, I prefer this image to the Greco-Roman conception of a woman because no woman looks like that statue. And this is what a woman's body looks like, without any shame. This is what, thank you very much, this is the image of femininity which the Maya had and have of very strong women, and women with real women's bodies. So this is not the princess suffering by the windowsill waiting for the knight to come and rescue her. These are very hard-working, notice the idea here of manual labor, females, and in that they incarnate the moon. The moon is the feminine spirit believed by the Maya to be the one working in the sky to make the days change, okay? So when the Mayans count the days, they do it the way we do it. I'm speaking right now as a Sephardic Jew, in our calendar, which is lunar. The Mayans also count by the moon. Okay, many cultures have lunar calendars. They have solar and lunar. The solar one is for the men, the lunar is for the women, and they say it's the women who do the work. So I give you two working women in the most noble of activities, making chocolate. Oh, isn't that cute? You can all go, aww. Because, if you've spent any time in the Andes, now we're going to jump down to South America and see Incan culture, which is going to be very different than Mayan culture. That friendly alien follows you around everywhere. And I say alien because you haven't experienced life until you are sitting down reading a book. Somewhere in the Andes, a llama comes down and sits right next to you and puts its neck in your lap. And again, I just got it's a particularly cute llama. These animals in both Andean mythology and Andean reality are extremely important. Before the Incas took over the Andes and most of Western South America in the 12th century. So if you know European history better, the Incas begin to create their empire right around the time of Robin Hood and King Richard the Lionheart. You know that's actually the last of the Native American civilizations of Peru. There's 5,000 years of history before that. And many, many other people, all of whom are still around. But you know the Incas because they were there when the conquistadors came. And so people have a habit of referring to Peru as La Tierra de los Incas. Well, it is La Tierra de los Incas, but apart from los Incas, you've got over 30 other nationalities there. Okay, so the Incas are actually the next to last to arrive, and then the last will be the Spanish. And they aren't even the last. In the 19th century, Peru will get a lot of other immigration, including Japanese immigration. And everybody who comes will look at that llama and just go woogie woogie, because in the tradition of one of the older peoples of the Andes called the Yaoyo people, the llama has the gift of speech. But the llama will only talk to you when you're being an idiot. Which is a good thing, because it might throw you off kilter if every time you saw a llama, it came up and asked you what you just read in the paper. And so, in one of the older pre-Incan stories, and you're going to see now how the Incas take this and change this. In the Yaoyo stories, the Yaoyo people live in the valley, what's called the Colca Valley in Peru. One day, let's say this cute little llama is going out to pasture, and his master brings him his human. Actually, the story doesn't say his master, it's wonderful. His human. Have you ever thought of your dog looking at you and saying to you, I wonder how my human feels today? So his human brings him out to this wonderful pasture land, and the llama just doesn't feel like eating. That cute little llama just does not feel like eating. And the man, the human, gets really angry, and he throws a corn cob at the llama. And now the llama gets teed off. And the llama shocks the human by saying, apparently in very elevated Quechua, one of the main languages of the Andes, "Fool, do you know what you've done?" I'm imagining the human is completely freaking out at this point because he's not used to his llama talking to him. But remember, in the traditional belief of the Andes, when you are being an idiot, the llama will talk to you, tell you what to do. And he says to him, "Do you not understand there is a great flood coming?" You know this is common to people's belief systems all over the world deluge. "And that flood can kill you and me and all of your family." Now the man, the human, is thoroughly hysterical. He says, "Well, what should I do?" So the llama says, "First of all, shut up." And that's wonderful. That's actually what he says in Quechua. First of all, shut up. Second of all, he says, "Follow me. Bring your family and follow me." And so the man at this point is now no longer throwing corn cobs at the llama. He's like, "Right on, Mr. Llama." And he gets his family and his animals, and they all follow the llama up to a high point of the Andes. By the way, I'm sure some of you can recognize that's Machu Picchu in the background. And by the way, when you visit Machu Picchu, please be prepared for llamas to get into every picture that you take. Because they're roaming around there. They love human cameras. They think it's a wonderful game. And they stick their necks in every picture you will take. Hence, that's how he got there. And so the llama leads the human and the other animals up to the top of a mountain called Vilcanota. And then the rains come. And they come for 5 times 8 days. Okay, now that's important because the number 5 in Andean tradition is the sacred number of the birth of the rain god, Pariacasu, who's hatched from 5 eggs. So we're going to have the number 5 appearing all the time. And the number 8 represents the double projection, listen closely, of the Inca Empire, which was called Tawantinsuyu, the land of the 4 quarters. The Incas, remember, saw themselves as the sons of the sun. So you had Tawantinsuyu above and Tawantinsuyu below. You do not have a hell in either Yaoyo or Incan tradition. In fact, their belief is a little closer to the Maya. They have a place called Urco Pacha, which means literally interior existence, which is supposed to be your own memories. So that's your own hell, your own memories. And so the Lama leads them up to the top of the mountain. They survive 5 times 8 days, 40 days. Is that reminding you of something from another mythology you might know a little bit better, right? So you're going to see throughout all the world's peoples certain numbers repeating. Okay, and that this is the common human heritage. And then after 40 days, the waters subside, and now everybody is taking the Lama quite seriously. And the Lama leads the people down, and they repopulate the Andes. The Lama is a lifesaver. Maybe that's why he's looking so self-satisfied with himself. Because that's a real who. I just like my Lama self. But that, you know, the Lama is a walking grocery store, people, because the Lama gives milk. And so that is milk, that is cheese, that is life. The Lama gives wool. It is freezing in the Andes. So when the great Spanish renegade who becomes the liberator of Argentina and Peru, San Martin, who had left Argentina when he was 5, comes back to the Andes when he's 34, he's very funny. Ay, madre mía, pero me dijeron que América Latina era tropical. They told me Latin America was tropical. Not if you're there. You will freeze everything off. Okay, so the Lama is your wool factory. And the Lama is your sweaters. And the Lama is your scarves. And your socks. And that animal is life in the Andes. And he knows it. Which is why he's always blessed. And there are Lama birthday ceremonies. And this is why they all have that cute little smug smile. When the Incas take over from the Yaoyos and the other people, I can tell you the Yaoyos and the other people obviously didn't like it. They still don't like it. They tend to get rather annoyed with the Peruvian Ministry of Tourism when they have all of these advertisements. You can also see them in National Geographic saying, "Come to Peru, land of the Incas," and the other ones are going, "Yeah, what about us?" Well, that's a problem when you don't know a country's history. The Incas made the Lama the royal animal. Now this is complicated because we see that in the folk belief of the Andes, the Lama is everybody's animal. They couldn't take Lamas away from people because people would starve. And one of the great achievements of the Inca Empire, despite their imperialism, I've got to give them one point. Under the Incas, nobody starved. There was no starvation. And who do we know of that from? How do we know of that? From the Spanish chronicles themselves. They wonder at that. It's amazing. So many people are starving in Spain. But here nobody starves. That was a great achievement of the Inca Empire. They were not so nice to the people they conquered, but if you accepted their subjugation, you wouldn't starve. The Incas made the Lama the royal animal and set aside a certain breed of Lama, which is taller than the other Lamas, for, listen closely because here it gets confusing, for the Inca. Wait, the Incas, people, the term Inca really refers to the king of the Quechua-speaking people. And these people never called themselves Incas, they always called themselves Quechuas, which is what they still call themselves. In Spanish chronicles, they will actually take the term used for the king and confuse it and use it for the Quechua people. Okay? So that's why when I talk about the Inca, I'm referring to the Inca Emperor. The Incas, well, we use that term now because since 16th century chroniclers used it, they even use it in Peru, but everybody's aware of the fact that it's not actually the term for the people. The term is Quechua, which is also the language that is spoken. Well, the Incan attitude towards Lamas was that they're good, but they should be subjugated. Spain's attitude towards the Incas, they're good, but they should be subjugated. And so we have this phenomenon which scholars of colonial Latin America speak about a lot. It's called animalization, turning people into animals. Now, definitely we have a lot of examples of that during the Spanish conquest. Unfortunately, we also have examples of that once the Latin American countries become independent. And we have some nasty examples of that when the Incas do it to other Indian peoples. This is something everybody can do to everybody else. And it conflicted with what life had been in the Andes before. Because prior to the Incas and then imperial Spain, the Andes looked a little bit more the way the Mayan area looked. That doesn't mean it was peaceful. There were a lot of city-states that fought each other. There was even a small empire called the Wari, but nothing that was ever as monolithic and strangling as first the Inca Empire was, and then, as we all know, Spain's very heavy-handed rule will become later. But the Lama, he remains, and he is a symbol for all the people of the Andes of survival and of resourcefulness. Because these animals were tamed from another wild animal called a guanaco about 5,000 years ago, these animals also see themselves, frankly, as either very hairy humans or they see you as a rather bold llama. And one thing I will tell you, which is very interesting, is all throughout the Andes, you're going to find stories and instances of llamas llamas rescuing people who get lost in the mountains. The llama has a very strong sense of smell, like a dog, and they can sense humans, even under an avalanche, and so this animal is very much considered the protector spirit of the rain god, Pariacasa. But the Incas come. The Incas are not the Yauyos, and they're not the Mayas. And if we speak about a really harsh imperial philosophy for the first time in Latin American history, well, Mexico is Latin America, so let me say South American history, because Mexico is North America. In South America, it's going to be the Incas. They are the conquistadors, but they're before the conquistadors. And you are looking at an image of somebody whom the Quechua Indians in Peru like, but let me tell you the other Indians do not like, and his name is Tupac Yupanqui. Now if you look at our last little bullet point here, we see the hated or revered image of Tupac Yupanqui. That is a sculpture you will find in contemporary Cusco, right, the imperial city of the Incas, fabulously beautiful city, 14,000 feet up in the Andes. Tupac Yupanqui, well, you know, he's got the conquistador thing, right? Oh, here I am. End of the 15th century, the very spoilt son and brilliant military strategist of the man who built Machu Picchu. Remember, now go back to the beginning of this talk, Pachacutec? That man who built Machu Picchu, that is his father. So like father, like son. Right, there it is. And Tupac Yupanqui is either, I would say after Francisco Pizarro, the Spanish conquistador, who led Spain's thrust into Peru in the 16th century, this figure has got to be probably the most hated figure in Peru by everyone except the Quechua Indians, who are half of the country. So I want you to see that there is no one single interpretation of history in Peru. And like the Egyptian pharaohs, Tupac Yupanqui considered his own body to be holy, and so after death, what had to be done to him? He had to be mummified. Now many people are shocked when they go to Peru and they think, oh, is this like ancient Egypt? Was there contact between the Incas and the ancient Egyptians? Folks, that is chronologically impossible. I hope you're aware of the fact that by the time we get to the 12th century, ancient Egypt is kaput. But we have, often in history, you know, people are pretty boring, they tend to repeat themselves, similar ideas. And so the Incas, like the ancient Egyptians, took as their supreme deity, not the rain god. The rain god is Pariacasa. He's more fun. He's not imperial. For those who are bent on empire, they take the sun and the spirit of the sun. And when you die, your body remains holy, even though your soul has gone back to the sun god. And so the Incas, just like the Egyptians, had a long and very elaborate tradition of mummification. And we are so used to that in South America, it's funny for us to go to Egypt and say, oh, they did that too. Because for the Incas, this was the way you preserved the king. Do the mummies of the Incas exist anymore? Well, in 1572, one of the Spanish viceroys, Francisco de Toledo, ordered them all burned. So we don't have any of the mummies of the kings. But we do have other mummies, because the Incas hid many other mummies. And if you're not prepared for that when you go to Peru, you better be prepared, because they pop up all over the place. And I say that because in the belief system of the Inca, death is again not the end. So, you know, in the Western world, you see a dead body, and of course Hollywood loves to terrify me with this. The body is just the body. That's all. It doesn't have to frighten you. And in Peruvian tradition, the body, you know, your soul is back with the Creator, your soul is back with the Sun God. The body can decompose, the body can be mummified. It does not frighten anyone. Okay, and it's something to keep in mind, because if you compare it to, I think, the kind of sick attitude we have in the West towards death. Oh, it's hideous and everything looks horrible. No, it's simply nature. It doesn't have to frighten anyone. Was anybody mummified apart from the kings and the priests for the Incas? No. For the Incas, that was an honor only given to the royal class. Where did the Incas come from? You know, Cusco in Peru is the city associated with them, but their myth tells another story. And their myth says that they came from the highest lake in the world. What is that? Do you know what that is? Lake Titicaca, up there on the border between Bolivia and Peru. It's phenomenally beautiful, beautiful place. They claim that is their Pacaritambo. Pacaritambo in Quechua, tambo means place, and Pacari means the dawn. That is their place of dawning. What does that mean? Their birthplace. And they came out of the lake in a group of 4 kings and queens, and they will go out of that lake towards their promised land. Is that reminding you of anything? People generally use the same motifs. Not necessarily because anybody in Peru was talking to anybody in the Middle East, but because these are basic human ideas. They repeat. And so they come from the eastern lake and they travel to what is now Cusco, and they invaded it around the 12th century. They were first called the invaders from Colasuyo, from the southern quarter of Tawantinsuyo. Nobody used the term Peru or Ecuador or Bolivia. The whole area is called Tawantinsuyo, which means the land of the 4 quarters. That should remind you of something here, because that is what our native people here call the American, what we now call the American Southwest, the land of the 4 quarters. Why the preeminence of the number 4? For the cardinal directions. And so these guys were the invaders from Colasuyo, and they did not even speak the language that later would be forever identified with them. Because Quechua is always, even in good textbooks that should know better, referred to as the language of the Incas. We know it was the language that the Incas adopted. They were speaking Aymara, which is the language of the Indians in Bolivia. And how do we know that? Well, that's something very interesting. Because in the early Spanish chronicles, which actually mirror the tales of the other Indian people, the prayers of the Incas in their sacred language, which the Spanish priests were simply transcribing without understanding it, What do we see? Those prayers are in Aymara. What was their language? Their language was Aymara. They had to adopt Quechua because Quechua was the lingua franca, the language of most of the people of the region. And then they adopt Quechua, and their way of speaking Quechua becomes what we call imperial Quechua. So when you study Quechua in Peru, you will only study the Incas dialect, which makes the other Indians quite annoyed. Okay, so again, we see the same way you have all of these divisions in the West, you are going to have them in the Americas. What does that myth say about their origin? According to the myth, the woman, oh, here we have women again, who conquers Cusco is called Mama Huaco. And the image of the warrior woman existed in the early part of Incan mythology and history. But as they become an empire, women, although respected, will be removed from the battleground. The other Indian peoples of Peru will keep women in the battleground. But by the time we get to Tupac Yupanqui, and we know his years, the Spanish chronicles recorded all of the Inca informants reciting the dynasty to him. He became king in 1470. And he dies 22 years later, right around the time that Columbus comes to the New World. Tupac Yupanqui, just like any Egyptian pharaoh, had a harem of women. And his chief wife was also his sister. Now, just as with the Egyptians, that custom was not practiced by anybody outside of the royal family. And before you say, oh my God, how primitive, may I remind you that all the royal houses of Europe, like the Habsburgs, who were marrying their first cousins, to the point that their dynasty ended up looking like a Picasso painting, also had this idea of maintaining the quote-unquote purity of the bloodline. You know, so it was a little bit hypocritical for the Europeans to say, oh, how primitive, because the royal houses of Europe were doing that as well. So there he is, Tupac Yupanqui. If you're in Cusco, he's a very big deal. If you go 30 miles outside of Cusco and get into a village where the Yayo people live, he's not a big deal. To each his hero. Sacsayhuaman. So outside of Cusco, now we're up, okay, what you're looking at now, folks, you're 14,000 feet up. You're in the Andes. I so hope those of you who haven't been there will have a chance to go there, because it is one of the most extraordinary places on the planet. You're in the heart of the Inca Empire. And that's the city of Cusco in the valley. And around it you see the ruins of what we know archaeologically was the largest fortress ever built. That is Sacsayhuaman. If you can look at the size of the stones, do you see the people? Okay. So the Incas were very, very great architects and stonemasons. And now we connect this also to their mythology and their belief. Because in Inca tradition, the stone is not an inanimate object. The stone has a spirit. The stone is considered a waka, a holy thing. And the stone is alive, and the stone is also your ancestor, the way we know for the Incas as well, the tree is also your ancestor. It's all part of the cycle of life. In this period, between 1450 to 1536, 1536 is in the final siege of Cusco, when Pizarro and his three brothers conquer Cusco definitively. One of his brothers is killed in that siege. Sacsayhuaman was taken down to half of its size. Do you realize how large it is still, in terms of half of its size? I want you to think of this fortress in its sacred setting as well, because the destruction of Sacsayhuaman by the armies of the conquistadors was devastating for the Incas, precisely because you understand it's not only rocks. These are holy, I'm going to use the term the same way you use it in Catholicism, so this is very strong what I'm saying. These are holy relics. They are relics of the early part of the world's existence. They are your oldest ancestors. So the destruction of Sacsayhuaman is devastating for the Incas. And now, of course, I have to balance this and remind you that the Incas had done this earlier to other peoples as well. And so, why was Sacsayhuaman built? It was built to control the other populations, which hated the Incas, and first thought that the conquistadors would liberate them. Well, they learned quickly that was not going to happen. But the original purpose behind Sacsayhuaman was definitely the control of those other Indian peoples like the Yauyos, who did not want the Incas running their business. From that point where this picture is taken, you can literally see out into 5 different surrounding populations conquered by the Incas, and then later conquered by the Spaniards. This is a fascinating image you're looking at. The picture itself of Manco Capac, child of the sun god, and the man believed to be the founder of the Inca dynasty. This picture itself, well, you can tell because it says Primer Rey del Cuzco, is obviously made after the Spanish conquest. This picture is during the time when Peru was still a colony of Spain. It's from the 18th century, so it's 200 years after the Spanish conquest. And many, many people in Peru were already what we say in Spanish is mestizo, mixed Spanish and native. And so you have a fusion of both beliefs. And in the 18th century, artists who were both mestizo or Spanish and also native painted these images of their oral tradition, which now begins to get written down in the later period of the colony. And this is a fantastic image because it shows us how into the 18th century, how alive the Inca traditions were, particularly among the elite. When you go to the Andes now, Andean tradition is very, very strong. What's disappeared is this elite, meaning the descendants of the Inca nobility, who until that point had a kind of favored position in the conquest, because guess what? Spanish nobility and Inca nobility had one thing in common: stepping on the heads of the poor. So isn't it interesting that after the conquest, Spanish nobility and Inca nobility could kind of come together to step on Spanish poor and Indian poor. And until the 18th century, there was a kind of unholy alliance. In the 18th century, right around the time this picture is painted, there's an uprising of the Inca nobility because they really think they're going to be able to take the country back from Spain. And at that point, then, Spain squashes what's left of the Inca nobility. These pictures would have been painted right before that final squash at the end of the 18th century. Now let's go to the picture, because the picture is extraordinary. I want to read this picture with you like a hieroglyph. So let me just ask one question. Can you all see it clearly? Look at every element now. Do you see Manco Capac is holding a bird in his hand? Okay? So that bird is called Indi. Indi. And that is actually the way you pronounce in Quechua the term for the sun, which we mispronounce in Spanish and English by calling it Inti, but it's Indi. This is the solar spirit of the sun. And according to Inca tradition, from the time of Manco Capac on, from the time that Manco Capac rose up from the waters of Lake Titicaca, he had this bird, the Indi bird, with him at all times. Every Inca sovereign carried this solar bird with him. His scepter has the image of the sun as the physical origin of the dynasty. Okay, we were born of the sun god. This is contrasting with the beliefs of the other Andean peoples who, remember I mentioned to you, they preferred another deity, Pareacasa, the rain god. Now you have the rise of the solar empires, and those who worship the water get squashed. Okay, interestingly enough, Spain's symbol is also the sun. Okay, the symbol of the Habsburg Empire, the double-headed eagle. So imperial philosophy tends to be pretty similar. So he has his sun scepter, he has Indi. Now look at his ears. Do you see very, very large earrings? You're going to, because the nickname for the Incas was actually long ears. Because as part of Inca tradition, when a young warrior, well, when a young man, became a warrior, and in many rites of passage, the ears were pierced, and huge earrings, the Incas liked huge earrings, of gold, which for the Incas was every bit as important as it was for the Spaniards. Because gold was a symbol of the sun. These huge earrings were placed, so every Inca sovereign was called by the non-Incas the long ears. Were any of you at the lecture I gave on the Pacific? Those of you who were there will remember that on Easter Island, there was a conflict between the long ears and the short ears, and the tradition in Easter Island is that the long ears were the conquering Inca, because one thing I forgot to mention to you, do you remember that wonderful statue of Tupac Yupanqui, looking quite sexy and strong? Tupac Yupanqui also did a bit of conquering overseas, and he sent Inca ships out to Easter Island. So the long ears got far. Notice the fabric that he is wearing, the design on the fabric in the Andes. Designs are not arbitrary. Every design represents your village. In the case of the Incas, these are designs that can only be worn if you are a native of Cusco, which they turned into their imperial capital. And what do you see behind Manco Capac? You saw it underneath King Pakal, the Jaguar, which shaman in the Andes also look at as a symbol of protective masculine strength. Now, I just want to say one thing here to you regarding this connection between humans and jaguars, because if you look at early European pre-medieval literature, I am referring to Irish, Welsh, and Norse, you will find many stories of people doing something called shape-shifting, right? Changing their forms into those of animals, assuming the animal strength, and then changing back to human form. Now, this is a symbolic idea. Well, one shaman that I met 6 years ago in Cusco said, you know, it's funny for us that people say shape-shifting can't occur, because when we hear about a disease like cancer, for us that's shape-shifting. I want you to think about that idea. A cell, a healthy cell becoming an unhealthy cell. Why is that any stranger than shape-shifting? And I say that to you because in the Andes, just as every place else, of course, you have a problem of cancer, although you have much less of a problem up there, actually statistically than any place else in the world, which may have something to do with the beautiful air. I'm sure lack of pollution probably helps. But this idea of changing form, you know, in the West we often will say, oh, that's a primitive idea. Well, first of all, it's an idea that, again, is an early Western tradition. The Irish have it, the Welsh have it, the Norse have it. Then it disappears in the Middle Ages. But for many, many other peoples, this remains a very real and relevant idea. Inti, the sun. Ilapu, lightning, is represented by the beautiful bracelets that the Inca wears on his arms. And Viracocha, the creator god who actually makes the first human beings in that great lake Titicaca. Is this a real or imagined trinity? It's an interesting question because the first Spanish missionaries that came to Peru automatically heard the stories of these gods and thought, oh, well, this is like our Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. I'm not sure that it was meant that way. And in the Andes themselves, in those mountains, people do not view these three gods as necessarily interconnected. In fact, the two gods who are most connected are Ilapu and Viracocha, lightning and creation. Inti is usually viewed as a bit of a foreign intromission, something brought in by the Incas, coming up originally from Bolivia. And what about the moon? Manco Capac's wife, Mama Oclo, will be given dominance over the moon. The moon in Quechua is called Quila, and the Inca queen was called Coyaquila, which means the queen of the moon. And if you go to Cusco now, at the end of August, if you want to get out of the heat of Arizona, that might be a good idea, you will see a very, very beautiful festival to the moon goddess and to every Quechua woman. So again, as with the Maya, the moon is associated with the woman, probably because of the connection between the monthly menstrual cycle and the moon and the tides. And there she is, the moon goddess. Now, take a look at both of the pictures. On your left, you have a beautiful picture from 2014 Cusco. That's a lovely young Quechua Indian woman, and she looks really self-satisfied as well because she won the beauty pageant in Cusco to be taken around as the queen that day. Okay, and she is dressed in, take a look because this is absolutely fabulous. Look at the fabrics that she is wearing, the traditional Inca symbols of the moon, and now look at the image again from the 18th century of Mama Quila, okay, the Inca queen, the moon goddess, and you will see a perfect parallel between the images. I say this because what you're looking at, people, is not only pretty sewing. What you're looking at for the Andes is a type of writing. And the word for embroidery, if we look at these two beautiful images, one from the 18th century and one from 2 years ago, the beautiful embroidery on the Inca clothing is known by the word kelka, which interestingly enough is the term that the Incas will use for the Spanish writing system. Because these are not just images, they are literally storytelling devices. This is how history is recorded in fabric. And none of this comes to you for totally free. So before I take questions, I do want to say three things to you, and then I will open this up for questions. First of all, if you don't yet know ACMRS, the Arizona Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies, I do want to tell you that we also have the honor of having a scholar of Andean art by the name of Jaime Lara on our staff, who has just published a book, which I would tell you to buy also because we published it, and it's called The Birdman of Assisi, in which Jaime Lara analyzes the connections between the Catholic images of St. Francis and the Andean birdmen, the gods of air and earth. So it's very, very interesting in terms of, I think, giving you more of a feeling for what I'm talking about right now. And if any of you sign up in the back, when I hope you will before you leave, on our sign-up sheet, we'll be sending you lots of information, and that is also something we will send you information about. Because, you know, sometimes in these lectures people ask me, oh, well, has mythology disappeared? Have these traditions died? They have not died. Did you see that very beautiful young woman in the Andes 2 years ago? She's quite alive. The people have not gone anywhere. They maintain their traditions, and sometimes they will tell you, you know, when you watch National Geographic documentaries, they'll say, oh, and the Indians still believe in these traditions. Well, why don't have the Indians come here? One Peruvian said to me, oh, well, look at these Jews and Christians. They still believe in their old stories. You know, that kind of makes you shudder, but the other thing should make you shudder too. So I do recommend that you get in touch with us, because not only are we looking at the traditions of the Americas, we're also, I think, in our center recovering certain traditions in Europe that have also not been given their due, like the Norse, like the Irish, like a lot of traditions that have, I think, often been shunted aside because historians in the 19th century decided they were not dominant history, whatever that means. We know that history has lots of faces, so I'm not saying don't study England and France, they're phenomenally important countries, but together with England and France, also study Peru, study Ireland, study Yucatan. It's all important. And after I take questions and before you leave, the lovely young woman in the back who's been filming me, who is our business specialist at ACMRS, she's also about to start her doctorate in historical linguistics. Angela is also standing by a little green box. Angela, could you please raise that box up for us? Everyone now turn around and watch Ms. Lowenhagen raise that green box, yes. Now, that is our contribution box. We would dearly love if each of you could just like fork out $1, or as Miss Piggy would say, cough up the cash a little bit. What you can give, $1 would be wonderful. And I just want to point out to you that Angela speaks Welsh, so if you don't give a contribution, she will shake you down in medieval Welsh, which is really weird, and has no vowels or few vowels, as I'm always ragging her about. And one thing I want to say here, as we see the lava in Machu Picchu. If you look at Inca architecture, or if you can go back, I'm going to go back now very quickly to the image of Mayan architecture that we saw at the very beginning, Calakmul. What you see in both of these forms of architecture, the Inca and the Mayan, are stones that speak. And this is what they are called in the Mayan language, Chayaba, the stone that talks. And the stones blend in with the natural world. Their idea of architecture was to create the natural world. So Machu Picchu imitates the mountain. And for the Maya, the pyramids imitate the hills of Yucatan and Campeche and Belize and Guatemala and wherever they are. And that connection with nature is something that you will also find in earlier European mythologies, and that's why we actually began this series with the Celts and the Norse. So I want you to see there's a type of world connection. As my favorite anthropologist, the Norwegian Thor Heyerdahl, used to say, people are pretty monotonous when you get to know them. And so human ideas repeat themselves. I think that's a good thing. That shows us more what we all have in common. And that is one of the greatest values of mythology, because it explains to us, as another great anthropologist, Claude Lévi-Strauss, said, mythology is human beings explaining themselves to themselves. And that's a fantastic value, and that's a fantastic value as literature as well, and also as philosophy. So now we have time for questions, and we want some questions. So, Diane.
The picture with Pakal on the Jaguar throne,
Yeah.
has no spots. Neither does the picture of at the end of the ancestor of the Incas. This Jaguar has no spots. Why?
Because when you make a jaguar with spots in both Mayan and Incan tradition, the spot symbolizes death. When you are incarnating the image of a ruler, that image, by the way, of Pakal is made after his death. That's made by his son, Chambalam. When you are placing your father in immortality, you're taking the spots off. That's an interesting question, Diane, because if you look at many other Mayan paintings, particularly on their ceramic vases, you will see the jaguar with spots and people with spots, which refer to segments of their mythology in which somebody is killed. But when you're immortalizing the king, after his transition into the spirit world, you get rid of those spots. Okay? Sometimes, by the way, you'll also see a jaguar with a scarf, which is just a wonderful image. And the jaguar with the scarf, the Mayans like scarves, they still like scarves very much. And the scarf is a symbol of the high priest or the high priestess. So that represents also a holy rite. It's very cute, the jaguars with scarves. Yes?
On the last slide, you mentioned the lava.
Llamas.
Ah, all right.
Never mentioned any lava.
Question still holds. People live on the surface of fire. What role, if any, did volcanoes play?
Okay, so the Inca definitely did not live on the Ring of Fire. The Incas were an inland empire, and they lived up in the mountains. So no, that played no role for them whatsoever. That they conquered some of the maritime people, yeah, they definitely did. Volcanoes, you have some frighteningly active volcanoes in Ecuador, which was the northern part of the Inca Empire, and in fact that was the area where the Inca Emperor Atahualpa was actually born. Volcanoes for them were disturbances. They did not play a major part in their conception of the world, because in Inca tradition, the volcano was subservient to the sun god. Now, if the sun god didn't appear to be efficient regarding cleaning up after the volcano exploded, that could be dangerous, and that is one reason, one of many reasons why the Incas perfected an extraordinary bureaucratic system, and extraordinary to the point the Spanish conquistadors raved about it. They had never seen anything like this, of social organization, in which if there were natural disasters, the people would be taken care of. But volcanoes are not an important part of Incan theory or mythology or philosophy. And yet again, you have to be careful. They did not live on the Ring of Fire. That's not their empire. They are a mountain empire. When they conquer the sea peoples still kind of keep on ignoring the Incas. The sea peoples maintain their own identity, and as a very important archaeologist, I would recommend that you take a look at it. Tom Zui Dema used to say the sea peoples in no way consider themselves inferior to the Incas. So they weren't particularly influenced by Inca ideology. But volcanoes for them were the earth god Pachacutec, rumbling. But they didn't take a major part in their thought. Okay, it's a good question, that's an honest answer. That wouldn't be the same for the peoples of Polynesia. But for the peoples of Peru, they were a pain in the neck, the volcanoes, but they were not a theological element. Earthquakes were. So when there was an earthquake, that was the earth god Pachacutec being very angry. Volcanic explosions did not have the same effect. Also remember that the best soil in the world is found in volcanic areas. So an eruption was often considered kind of a temporary disturbance, but the results from it would be very good for 100 years, because that's where the best farming is. That's also why you see so many people living on the slopes of volcanoes, including in Italy. Why do you think so many people live by Vesuvius? Any other question? Go for it.
In Machu Picchu, it was his
Summer Palace, Pachacutec's Summer Palace.
But yet, they also used it for astrology.
No, they didn't. That's a kind of funky, new age, I'm watching too many Discovery Channel hippie documentaries.
So they sit there and they start talking about
Yeah, I know. They love to tell you that the Indians are not doing anything but gazing at the stars. So let me clarify, because your question gives me a great chance to clarify. When the Incas looked at the stars, they were infinitely more interested in what that meant in terms of agriculture than in terms of predicting your future. That they really didn't care about. So when they constructed buildings in accordance, and this includes the Maya as well, with different constellations, those marked different periods of the year for planting and for harvesting. That does not make their achievement any the less extraordinary, because they were magnificent observers of the heavens. But it's kind of 20th, 21st century, North Americans who want to say, oh, well, that's my destiny. Well, not for the Indians.
the alignment of this window and that window.
Oh, no, those alignments alignments are true. They're planetary alignments to show stages of the seasons. So for example, when you're up in Machu Picchu, and you're in the central point, which is called the Intihuatana, where the sun is hitched to a post, which on certain days of the year has a weird shadow and a weird alignment, that's not for your astrological sign. That's when they can tell when planting should be done throughout the different areas of the empire. I mean, in the case of the Incas, it's really quite extraordinary because the Incas were practicing terrace farming, and you know, they would grow different crops on different terraces, and that insinuated different areas of their empire because the eastern part of their empire was more tropical. That went into the Amazon. The northern part, northern Peru and Ecuador, is arid and high with some tropics. You get down to Collasuyu, the southern part, you have arid mountains and then the driest desert on the planet in Chile. So they were very interested in what the stars looked like at certain periods of the year to keep a kind of agricultural calendar. And folks, and thank you very much for asking this because your question really takes me to a central point. I think we go so crazy trying to see these mystical points of view that don't exist and that the Indians themselves laugh at, that we ignore their great achievements, which were scientific. They were they are magnificent observers of nature, and their interest in the stars was much more astronomy than astrology. Much. Thank you for asking that question, because that's great. That's a question that opens up a can of worms. We like that. Yes, my dear.
I've noticed that you are really hating on Discovery Channel.
Yes. Passionately. And you who are the age that King Pakal was when he became, you know, the king of Palenque, let me dearly ask you, because I know you're a very intelligent young boy, please do not ever consider using the Discovery Channel as a historical source. Because, and I think this is something very important we have to remember, when we watch television, we kind of go into a childlike tell me a story trance. You, child, are already more intelligent than many of your elders. And please know that what you are watching on the Discovery Channel, to a certain degree the History Channel, I like to call it the non-History Channel, is a lot of supposition, people supposing things, and dramatic things to get your interest. And the real truth is always much more interesting than the Discovery Channel. So the crazy man on the Discovery Channel with the hair sticking up who always says, oh, these are aliens, these came from outer space. You know, I don't actually think he believes that, but I think he has an amazing business going because he knows he can sell that idea. So it would be fantastic if at your age, my dear, again, you're the age Pakal was when he became king, so you can develop a kind of discriminating attitude, meaning you can tell the difference between Hollywood, you know, which is a lot of what's on television, just stories, and when you actually, you know, become old enough, which will probably be in about a year, to actually start reading the history and the archaeology, which at the end of the day is much more interesting than anything you'll see on the Discovery Channel. Yes?
You're going to tell us not to use Wikipedia.
Yes, don't use Wikipedia. Because Wikipedia is rubbish. Wikipedia is absolute rubbish, and I will put it to you like this. You would not go to a hospital where they tell you, oh yeah, we'll allow anybody to come in and be a doctor. Wikipedia has anybody and their neighbor and their pet rhinoceros writing articles about history and literature, and it is sheer rubbish.
Well, you got a 50% chance.
Yeah, but I'm not going to go to a hospital where I have a 50% chance.
Okay, but you got a
So I am going.
same shot there.
No,
No,
absolutely not. And I'm going to tell you how. If you look at the Encyclopedia Britannica, with all its probably not pro-Irish stance, every article in the Encyclopedia Britannica on the great figures of Ireland is beautifully researched. I'm going to give you one example, and you can take it from there. The Irish pirate queen of the 16th century, Grace O'Malley, that article about her in Wikipedia has, and you can count them, my friend, 34 errors. In the Encyclopedia Britannica, wait, you asked me a question, I have to give you an answer. 1 error, which was corrected when Brian Farrell from University College Dublin pointed it out to the Encyclopedia Britannica. So it is not the same. No, it is not.
But I did fact check a history book one time and got a section on Mohammed.
Okay, I think you have to be careful when you say a history book. Is it a book written for popular culture, or is it a book written by a historian?
It was a book written for high schools, and it was on Mohammed, and it started out, Muhammad, blessed be his name.
Can we keep the questions to the Incas and the Mayans, please? I'm not about to argue about Islam here. People, thank you very, very much for coming. Please
So yes, you got special email.